What is going on, guys? Hopefully, you are all doing well. Um, Sorry it has been so long since I recorded any sort of content for my YouTube channel. The reason for that has been just that I haven't played any long classical tournaments of late since December when I last dropped my videos. So that's the reason. I have played in two tournaments since then, but they were both speed tournaments, so obviously those games are not going to be recorded. But just recently played in the 2023 Idaho Closed, the state championship, the event of the year for people in Idaho. And I turned in a pretty solid result. Can't complain about the event as a whole. And I'm just gonna start working you through you game by game for you guys. So please also forgive me. I have since I've recorded my last videos, I have moved, and the lighting in this room is not as good. Hence the reason I'm recording from my bed and not my desk. Because if I was recording from my desk, you would barely be able to see me. The last apartment was a whole lot more conducive. So, a little bit of background about this tournament as a whole was the largest attended Idaho Closed of all time. I think there were 50 plus people playing for the state championship, which is just crazy. Some very strong players. And it's a 3 day event here in Idaho. So you play two games on Saturday, two on Sunday, and two on Monday. So going into round one, usually as an 1800 level player, I'm going to be paired with somebody several hundred points below me. And I try to, this is for the state title, so I try to not go into the mindset thinking that the game is going to be easy. I always try to approach it from the mindset that expecting the game to play hard, my opponent to really make me earn it. That way, I'm always ready for a serious game, and I'm not playing down to the level of my competition. So arrive to the wall chart, check the pairings, and lo and behold, it is a opponent who I'm familiar with their last name, but we've never played over the board. And the reason I'm familiar with him is because I used to teach his brother back when he was younger. His brother was also playing in this event and is a very strong player, pushing expert level. And I'll get into details on that game down the road because him and I also played. So instantly, I knew I'm not dealing with the 1200. I've seen Luke play. I know he's not 1200. So my guard was up right from the get go, and let's just see how the game played out. So, so we had a Sicilian, and here obviously there's a variety of different moves you can play. You can play knight f3 mainline stuff. Knight f3 d4 stuff would be an open Sicilian. You can play knight c3 f4, playing in the style of the Grand Prix attack, very solid. There's lines with knight c3, g3, bishop g2, and playing like a closed, very slow, positional, grinded out type of game. Yeah. There's lines where the bishop goes to b5, the Rosalimo, that's become very popular. And I think bishop b5 is one of the most common moves that's being played currently. So a lot of different ways you could go. You can also do what I did, and that is play the Smith Mora, which I've been learning about for several months. I have a course on it. I've spent a lot of time on it. But it's a very deep course. It's a very deep course, and the lines are, this position you do this position you do this position you do this. And when you don't have a lot of actual game experience, it can be easy to confuse which strategy you're supposed to go about. The idea of the Mora is this. So they're going to take, and then you play c3. And then on dc3, which is not what my opponent played, there's knight c3. In exchange for the pawn, you have a very nice lead in development. Knight on c3, opponent e4. And you're going to play rapidly and look for tactics. Knight f3, bishop c4. And build up some sort of initiative in exchange for the pawn. I think to this point I only have one actual tournament game that I've played in in this line, and I won that game last year in in Coeur d'Alene in the tournament I won. Um, I won my one game in that line. So, but my opponent opted for d3, and this is a move that used to cause me issues when I first started learning this gambit. Um, because I usually didn't come up with the right plan for white. And since then, I've done a lot of research on it. You can take right away bishop d3. Um, but the better move is just to play c4 first. So this d3 pot is not going anywhere. We're going to take it at any time we want. We've got two attackers. And right away, we get this nice little bind here in the center. You guys might notice this position is going to start to resemble what would be a Marazzi bind. The Marazzi bind is a very, very strong system that white can play against the Sicilian, where it's very slow and methodical. White usually has a little bit more space, develops his pieces naturally. And black can get cramped, and it can be kind of hard to play for black, especially if you're not too familiar with what you're trying to do. Usually black will try to trade off a couple pairs of minor pieces. But yeah, I could tell from the get-go from my opponent was not happy with the way this game developed in the opening. I think he's not as familiar with this e4, c4 lines, Marazzi style of play. So I think this was a good choice. He played knight c6, fine move. We take the pawn on d3. My opponent goes d6, so natural development. And I played knight c3, and my opponent played knight f6. And at this point, there's nothing really special going on here for either side. Black's brought out his knights. I brought out my knight and my bishop. But you notice these little pawns form a nice little control over the d5 square, which is very nice. Here is where I kind of took my first real longer think. Not too long. And kind of debated different things going on here and what I should play for white. So if I go knight f3, I might be opening myself up to bishop g4. And in some lines, that's going to open up knight d4, attacking my pinned knight, which could be annoying, or knight e5, attacking the pinned knight. So I had to decide if I want to let him play bishop g4 on knight f3. Other ideas would be, bishop e3 is a move, knight g2 is a move, f4 is a move, although it's not really in the style of the Marazzi bind, which is what I'm playing. Then there's other moves, and what I played, I didn't actually play any of those moves I just suggested. I played the move pawn h3, and I just decided I don't want to give my opponent an opportunity to trade off minor pieces so easily. In a position where they're going to have less space. I want to keep the pieces on the board. I want to grind the game out. And I just want to outplay them. So h3 is a good idea. First, we're going to put the knight on f3, but we're going to prevent the bishop from going to g4. So this is a strong line. And now my opponent played bishop d7. And I played knight f3. So my opponent played knight before, and this was another kind of important moment. There's a lot of good moves in this position for white, but I think it's important to try to come up with the right idea here. Again, black is saying, I want to get rid of your bishop and just take some pieces off the board and give myself a little bit more space to work with. The idea also behind this might be if he takes my bishop and I take back, the bishop can go to c6, and he's created a little bit of tension in the center of the board in some lines. So I had to decide here, are we going to let him take our d3 bishop? Obviously, we're defending it. Or am I going to drop to like e2 or bishop b1? Those are really the only moves if I'm going to hold on to my bishop. And this was actually a pretty easy decision. I felt like this whole game flowed very naturally, and I decided to play bishop b1. And you might be saying to yourself, well, aren't you moving a piece twice in the opening? And while that is true, and we typically want to avoid moving pieces over and over again in the opening, the reason this is okay is because our opponent has also made multiple moves with his knight. So he's already made two moves with his knight. And after a3, which is a useful move, gaining me some space and kicking his knight back, his knight's going to have to make a third move. So I'm not really worried about the fact that I played bishop d3, bishop b1. That's not going to cause me any issues. So my opponent played rook c8. So he is bringing his rook to the open file. He's attacking the c pawn. But here, white just has a3. And now my opponent has only two squares he can safely move this knight to. So on c6, he is cutting his rook off from the pressure against the c4 pawn. So his only active plan, he's cutting the rook off if he plays knight c6. But on knight a6, which is what my opponent played, the knight is not going to a really good square. And you might say, well, couldn't the knight go to c5 afterwards and put some pressure against this e4 pawn? He can go to c5, and that's what he does later. But the issue is he's not really going to have enough attackers on this e-pawn. He's going to have two knights, and I have a bishop and a knight defending, which is plenty. Also, I have the option at a later point of playing b4 and gaining more space and making the knight look silly. So at this point, I was very, very happy with the way the opening was going. Definitely felt like my opponent was very off balance, and I played the move queen e2. So the idea is supporting my pawns here and saying at some point if he goes knight c5, I have three defenders over the e4 pawn, so that's not really going to threaten anything. Another thing I was also looking at is on knight c5, do I want to go b4 right away, or should I play something else first? And I actually think you should play something else first. On knight c5, b4, yes, we gain space, but he has knight b3. And actually, we're forking and we're going to lose material, which isn't good for white. So on knight c5, my plan was actually to go bishop c2. So we want to keep his knight out of the b3 square, and then we're ready to push when the knight has to go backwards, which is useful. My opponent played knight c5, improving his knight, but the knight really doesn't have much potential on c5 because there's just bishop c2 in the position. Opponent played g6, a natural move in the Sicilian. You want to fianchetto your dark squared bishop on g7. White castles. Black plays bishop g7. And now I had a little bit of a pause here. I've developed my pieces very naturally. My king is in a good position. Now what do we do? Now that our pieces have gotten to good squares. Well, I want to move the a1 rook at some point. I want to move the c1 bishop. And I'm probably going to want to improve the f1 rook. My other pieces are good right now, and I don't think I need to move them. So I did want to be a little bit careful right away, guys. If you play b4, which feels very natural, you're just in trouble. Because your opponent has knight f takes e4. And then if you take on c5, he's going to play knight c3. And he's going to hit our queen. And we're actually just lost. Because after we save our queen somewhere, he can just take on c5. And he's going to be chilling up a pawn. The dark squares are very, very weak. And this is just not good. So this is one of the tactics you can fall into here. And on bishop e4, there's just knight e4. And if we play queen takes e4, there's just bishop takes c3 in the position. And on knight takes e4, there's going to be bishop takes rook. So you want to watch that diagonal. You don't want to push the b pawn too soon. Again, there's no rush. You're probably going to be looking at something like rook b1 and push, or defend this knight and then push, is the idea. Here I decided to improve my rook first with rook d1. The idea is that at a later point, I'll probably play e5 and try to open the d file where his queen and my rook are lined up. He castles. And here I played bishop d2. E5 first was better, but I was definitely in the mindset of I wasn't trying to rush anything. I kind of felt like my opponent's position, while it might not be losing, is very annoying to play. So there's no reason to rush. Let your opponent feel that pressure, because that's going to give him more odds of messing up. So rook e8, again, he's not really threatening anything. He's just waiting to see what I do. And I played rook a to c1. So now in comparison, if you look at the pieces on the board, my rooks are really, really good. My knights have good potential. These bishops are a little funky, but at a later point, they can redeploy to better options, like you'll see in a few moves. While black's pieces are developed, it's a whole lot easier to play white's position because of his space advantage. And you're going to see how that had an effect on this game here in a second. So he played b6. Again, really just, I don't think he was sure what he should be trying to do at this point. And at some point, you just got to make a move. Now I hit him with b4. Now that I'm fully developed, it's time to hit that knight, put the question to it. And now this is an awkward scenario because a6 is not a great square. b7 is not a great square. And e6 is the only other safe square. Every other square I have covered in my position by my pieces. So e6 is the best move, which is what he played. And here I just played the calm waiting bishop b3. Yeah, I could have kept pushing forward, maybe with like e5, but you don't want to rush when you got a good position. Just keep improving it and see what happens. So bishop b3 felt natural. Part of the reason is because this bishop on c2, even if we play e5, which I'm probably going to do, the bishop on c2 doesn't really do anything. It's on a diagonal that's blocked by two pawns. Here on b3, we support the c4 pawn. And at a later point, maybe I play c5 instead and open up that light square diagonal, which is a whole lot more useful for the light square bishop. My opponent played rook b8. And I think this is kind of just a waiting move. It doesn't look very natural, but again, I could tell my opponent wasn't sure what he wanted to do here. And here I felt like it was time to break somewhere. Either e5 or c5. What I noticed is if I go c5 right away, he can just take with the b pawn. And now there isn't going to be b takes c5 because my bishop's going to be hanging on b3. It's just going to be a free piece. So c5 was one of my two pawn breaks, but it doesn't work. So that means, okay, first I move the bishop. So now my pieces are really good. Now my bishops are all good. My knights are good. My rooks are as good as they can be. Now it's going to be time to look to do something active. My opponent played bishop c6, so he's trying to create some pressure against the e-pawn, but it's really too late at this point. There's a couple different routes you could go here for white. I chose the route that isn't as strong, but still better for white. Knight e5 is the strongest move here, utilizing the fact that the d-pawn can't take, because the rook will take the queen. Knight e5 hits the undefended bishop with tempo on c6. So we're just improving our knight in the center of the board. But I played pawn to e5, which felt very, very natural. There's not d takes e5 because of rook takes queen. So that's not an option. So now this knight has to move. And he played knight e4. That's very natural, trying to trade off some pieces. He's been cramped for a while in his position, and trades are usually good in that scenario. And I played knight d4, which is actually not the best move in this position. I was trying to create pressure against the c6 bishop in some lines. And I did calculate here for a while, and I was trying to hit him with some tactical threats and see if we could finally force him to make a mistake. But he didn't. He actually played some of the best lines here. So if you guys are wondering what the best move is here for white, it is a move I considered, which was knight takes e4, bishop e4. But here it was the follow-up move that I didn't consider for white long enough. That's strong, is knight g5. And I think the reason I didn't think about this is because I'm offering an exchange of another minor piece. So typically in the Marazzi bind as black, if you could trade off two minor pieces, you're usually doing pretty good. So I thought, well, this makes it an easy trade of two minor pieces here. So shouldn't black be doing decent? The problem is now that Now I have uncovered an attack on this bishop. So this is something that has to be dealt with right away. And once the bishop moves, we just take on d6. And now on e takes d6, this bishop is opened on this diagonal. And if queen takes d6, obviously we're going to take the queen with the rook. So I missed knight g5 as being so strong after knight takes e4. Otherwise, I would have played that line instead. So I played knight d4 instead, which actually, strangely enough, blunders most of my big advantage I've built up. But my opponent played knight takes d4, which is the best move. And here I played bishop takes d4. So now I'm attacking his e4 knight twice, and it's only defended one time. So he has to do something about that. And he swapped on c3, which is what I was expecting. He's been cramped, so trades seem natural. And here's where I felt like I knew I had probably missed something, and my advantage was not winning anymore. So I wanted to just focus and try to continue to maintain an edge since I had already slipped a little bit. So here, I felt like I could take either way. Bishop takes c3 or rook takes c3. They both have different pluses and minuses. Bishop takes c3, which is what I played. I felt like I am opening the rook onto the d file. So now taking on e5 is not possible because the rook's going to take the queen. And the reason I had debate on which piece to take with, the rook or the bishop, is because I thought maybe on rook c3, I can bring the rook to d3. And I'm creating this big pressure on the d file against d6, threatening to win some stuff here in a few moves. But bishop takes c3 was the move I chose to play and is actually the slightly better move. So now he can't take on e5. And here's where I was like, man, what he should do, guys, is this is the moment to step away from this pressure on the d file. And queen c7 or queen c8 is the way to go. Actually, queen c7, because we need to keep another defender for black on the d6 pawn. But my opponent played queen d7. And instantly, the advantages of doing puzzles and a lot of tactics that I do, when you do stuff like that, sometimes your head will just tell you there's a tactic. You won't necessarily see it, but you know there has to be something there. So I'm like, okay, there has to be something here. I was sure of it. My head was telling me there was something here. I'm like, now I just got to find it. This is not a natural move because you're just keeping the queen under pressure. And right away after sitting here, probably for a couple of minutes, I saw this move, e6. E6 doesn't work right away, though. E6 doesn't work right away because he just has queen takes e6. And you might be saying, what were you trying to threaten with e6, though? Because he can also just take with the pawn. My thought was if he takes with the pawn, can't I hit him with c5? c5, very, very strong. We are opening our bishop, and we're threatening to fork him on e6. So hit his queen and his king, which seemed very, very strong. But e6 right away, there's just queen takes e6. So I was like, well, that doesn't look right. And then I thought, well, can I play c5? c5. Move my pawn to a square where it's attacked twice. Obviously, dc5 he's not playing because of rook takes queen. So that's out. And bc5, I'm like, yeah, sure, he wins a pawn. I can't take back bc5 because he has rook takes bishop. But my idea was this. I thought, b takes c5. Don't I have e6? And he cannot take this pawn on e6 because his queen gets hit and he's in check. And then I started to think that maybe on c5, I have to be careful still because maybe there's bishop b5 as an in-between move, attacking my queen. Computer says I'm still winning here, but believe it or not, there's actually a stronger way to play this line. And I found it, and this is maybe one of the best 3-move sequence I've ever found in a classical tournament game. And that actually b5 is the move. hitting his bishop, and we're going to go for the same thing. He's going to move his bishop, and then I'm going to play c5. And on c5, he can take me with the b pawn, but then we're playing e6. And not only are we hitting his queen and the pawn cannot take back, we're also threatening to fork him on f7. And that's why this is so strong, because we're going to be attacking his queen and we're going to be threatening to fork on f7. So he's just losing. So here he has to move the bishop somewhere. He played bishop a8, and I played c5. So even if e6, guys, was not a threat for black, say he could just allow it, c6 just threatens to hit the queen and permanently lock his bishop where it's going to do nothing the rest of the game. So in essence, it'd be like I had equal material on the board, but like you're playing up a piece. That's not the case here. E6 is a threat and is the most important threat in the position. But c6 would also be completely winning for white. So this move is a great move. And then he paused for a long time and finally played b takes c5. He saw e6. I think he accepted his fate. e6 came quick. And queen b7, and now we fork him. Hit the rook and the king. King f8. Now we promote the pawn to a queen. Or a rook, so he's in check. King takes. And this was actually a little sneaky, because he's setting the trap that if I get too greedy and play bishop takes g7, he's going to mate me on g2. Okay, but why not? Why does that not work with rook takes? Because on rook takes, I can take the bishop with check and then stop the mate. Here he's already losing, so he sets me up that if I get too greedy and just try to win a bishop for nothing, I get mated. So he's being very resourceful here, even though he's losing. But I saw the mate threat, and I played bishop d5. And the rest of the game is not too consequential. I kind of thought he would just resign at this point. But he played on, queen d7. And now we force more pieces off the board. Bishop c6, pinning the queen to the king. Bishop has to take. Pawn takes. Now the queen is hit. Now the queen takes. Now we can take the bishop. And here I expected resignation, but my opponent played a few more moves. Blundered another rook. I hit him with the mate threat, and then he just got mated. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this game. This is definitely probably my favorite game from the tournament as a whole. Let me know what you think in the comments below. And yeah, I'll be back at some point dropping round 2 that was also played later that day. Thank you everyone for watching. I appreciate it.